Imagine being a pioneer in your industry and still getting told by executives that no one knows who you are and no one would buy your products, and then you build a brand valued at $1 billion. Let's talk about it. Pat McGrath grew up in Northampton, England in the 1970s. She was raised by her single mother, Jean, who was obsessed with makeup and fashion. And from a very young age, Pat would become obsessed as well. They had a big problem though. Back then, you couldn't find makeup for darker skin tones. It was all tailored towards white skin. But that never stopped Jean. She would combine different kinds of makeup with stuff like cocoa powder to get the right color for her skin tone. She taught Pat that if it doesn't exist, go create it. And as Pat grew up, she found another passion in the underground club culture of London in the 80s called the New Romantics. The New Romantics aesthetic was bold, colorful, expressive, so Pat was hooked, and as a result her makeup became much bolder with a lot of color, and it was that boldness that actually got her discovered. One day when Pat was in a crowd waiting to get a glimpse of the band Spandau Ballet, Radio 1 presenter Janice Long spotted Pat because of her unique makeup and said, "Will you do that on me?" It was in that moment she knew what she'd do for the rest of her life. And when she started her career in the 90s, makeup had some strict rules and Pat would break them all. Makeup needed to be undetectable. And here was Pat using all sorts of colors, so this rebelliousness and limitless creativity got Pat noticed by some big names in the fashion industry. Then Pat met Steven Meisel, who's considered to be the greatest fashion photographer of all time. So when he chose to work with Pat on his shoots, this was a huge cosign, and the two of them created some iconic covers together. So at this point, Pat had made a name for herself and she was in high demand. She was doing the makeup for the biggest runway shows and the biggest brands in the world. And the creativity in Pat's makeup had no limit, and it would go anywhere from historical to dramatic to ethereal. Pat traveled to these shows with 87 trunks of makeup, props, and books that she was pulling inspiration from. Pat had become very well known, and she was adored by models and makeup artists alike, and they call her mother because of how nurturing and supportive she is. She was on every brand's radar, and they all either got inspired by her, copied her, or tried to work with her. So it was at this time in the early 2000s that Pat started to pitch the idea of her own makeup line to high-level makeup executives. But they all turned her down and said that no one knew who she was and that there would never be a demand for the type of makeup she did on runways. Fast forward years later to the social media age, and Pat had built a huge following online. And she found that she had all these makeup fanatics begging her to release her own product. And it was in that moment that she realized how wrong those executives were, and so she started her brand Pat McGrath Labs in 2015. Her mission with the brand was to create products that worked perfectly on all skin tones so that no one had to go through what she and her mother had to go through. Now Pat is a marketing genius, so her first product sold out in seconds. Her first product was a limited edition gold pigment called Gold 001, and Pat's launch strategy was amazing. She started teasing the product on social media with posts that had a lot of mystery and built a lot of interest and hype. Pat had only made 1,000 units of the product, and she made that very clear in the build-up of this launch. It's very powerful in a launch to tell people to mark their calendars because a product is going to sell out quick. This builds an incredible amount of hype and FOMO and urgency in people wanting to get their hands on the product. And to really bring the launch home, Pat made an event out of it by taking over the Jardin des Tuileries in Paris. Pat invited her celebrity and model friends and applied Gold 001 on them. And that goes to show how incredibly valuable it is to have a network like that. And as they say, your net worth is your network. Which takes me to another genius marketing angle of Pat McGrath Labs, which is how they position their products as being made for elite use cases. Almost all of their products get their debut on a runway show or a red carpet event. I like to call this the Nike angle. And Nike very famously do this by positioning their products as being made specifically for the top elite athletes in the world, which sends the message of if it's good enough for them, it's more than good enough for you, the everyday consumer. To me, Pat McGrath clearly uses this angle too by giving a product a backstory, which is that she's used this specific product to achieve an incredible runway look. And it also sends the message that the performance of this product is top tier, since here it is being used in the most iconic use cases in the world, and this builds a lot of credibility. And Pat is definitely making the brand strong long term in many ways. Her principles of diversity and inclusiveness are such strong pillars of the brand. Another genius thing that Pat does with her content is post her mood boards. She posts these references that she's inspired by, and this content is not only a great way to tease upcoming products, but it also gives the audience the feeling of being a part of Pat's creative process. And I also love how much the brand plays into this nostalgic retro feeling that's not only an incredibly popular aesthetic nowadays, but they execute it to perfection in a way that's undeniably modern. And this comes from the incredibly high quality execution and creativity of their campaigns. And the modern aspect is so important because it's nice to have a retro aesthetic, but you don't want to come off as outdated, especially in an industry where the products are in constant evolution and are expected to perform at the highest standard in the history of the industry. What I also love about this nostalgia is how it's centered around Pat's authentic love for these eras. We're constantly reminded of Pat's longevity with these archival throwback posts of Pat's work on an iconic runway back in the day. And these posts remind you that Pat's been trailblazing for over 30 years now. It's amazing how she's been influential for the last 3 decades. And here's an example I found funny, and it's this comment that was alluding to Pat's makeup being inspired by Julia Fox's famous eye look. And Pat jumped in with a humble reminder that she was the one who created Julia Fox's eye look, and throughout her career, Pat has basically been creating every trend in makeup. Another example of it was Pat McGrath's incredible work for the Margiela Artisanal show in January this year, and this show broke the internet. Pat created a makeup look which shocked the world, and it was this unreal looking glass skin, and everyone was scrambling to find out how she did it. The aftermath of this show was this huge wave of people trying to recreate Pat's glass skin look at home. And some people thought that Pat would gatekeep the secret and never give away her process, but of course they thought wrong, because Pat hosted a live stream masterclass where she showed the process of creating glass skin in detail. And the thing is, she showed that she used products that weren't all from Pat McGrath Labs. So many other people would have never shown the process because they wouldn't have wanted to promote other competitors. But Pat did not care, and she gave away her secrets for the love of makeup. She also announced that she's working on a product that's going to make the glass skin achievable at home in a more convenient and everyday friendly way. And this is yet another example of Pat McGrath showing how business savvy she is and commercializing a viral hit in a smart and tasteful way that is typical of Mother. Speaking of mothers, on a personal note, this video has special significance to me personally because my mom is a makeup artist and she has been for over 40 years now. And when I told her I was working on this video, she got so excited and she told me that she's a huge fan of Pat's and that she makes the best pigments and the best products out there. The last thing I'll say is this: I need to take it back to Pat's mother, Jean, who instilled this passion into her daughter and this philosophy that if it doesn't exist, go and create it. Sadly, Jean passed away in 1992. In 2021, Pat McGrath was named a Dame of the British Empire. This is a huge title, and in Pat's case, this honor was given to her to recognize her work in fashion, beauty, and diversity. In other words, diversity didn't exist in makeup, and Pat went and created it, just like her mother taught her. What brand do you want me to break down next?